Look around the room you are in right now. I mean, maybe you have, like, a filtered water pitcher sitting on your counter.
Right, or even just a brass doorknob on your door.
Yeah, exactly. Or look at the tailored seams on the shirt you're wearing. Or, just think about the toothbrush sitting in your bathroom. We take these things completely for granted.
We really do. We just assume they've always been around.
Right. And we tend to think of innovation as this very modern Silicon Valley phenomenon, like some tech CEO in a glass-walled office inventing the future. But today, we are completely flipping that script.
It is a massive blind spot in how we view history, honestly. We basically assume humanity was just stumbling around in the dark, waiting for electricity to be invented before any real engineering could happen.
Which is why today's deep dive is just so exciting. We have a truly fascinating stack of sources in front of us. We're talking theological texts, historical journals, video podcasts, and our mission is to look at some of the most famous historical figures through a completely different lens.
A highly practical lens.
Exactly. We are looking at the prophets, but not, as spiritual guides. We are stripping away the theological interpretations for a moment to examine them as pioneering inventors, engineers, and resource managers.
Because what's fascinating here is that when you dig into these texts, you realize these inventions were not just random strokes of genius or, like, magic.
Right. They weren't just snapping their fingers.
Exactly. The sources describe them as divine inspiration, yes, but they manifest as highly engineered, practical solutions born out of sheer necessity. They were designed to solve complex physical problems.
You really push human civilization forward. So prepare to have your perspective totally altered on the everyday objects sitting in your house. Let's start at the micro level, the literal dawn of daily tools.
The foundational stuff.
Yeah, okay, let's unpack this. Our sources point to Prophet Idris as a massive catalyst for human civilization. The texts credit him as the first person to use a pen for writing.
Which is huge on its own.
Right, and the first to use a needle for tailoring. Now, I can immediately grasp the pen. Writing is record-keeping, it's communication. But I am genuinely hung up on the needle.
Really, the needle is one of the most important ones.
But it is just a tiny sliver of metal with a hole in it. How does something that small actually shift the trajectory of human history?
Well, think about the underlying mechanics of human survival before that tiny sliver of metal existed. Early humanity was essentially draping crude, heavy animal skins over themselves just to survive the elements.
Just literally throwing a hide over their shoulders.
Right. And to keep a hide on your body, you have to physically hold it closed or, tie it off in a very rudimentary way. That severely limits your mobility.
Oh, because your hands are full.
Exactly. It limits your ability to work with your hands, to run, to hunt, to build. So the invention of the needle fundamentally transformed humanity's relationship with the environment.
Because it allows you to actually fit the material to the human body.
The physics of it are brilliant. By cutting and sewing a tailored garment, you are creating a localized environment for the human body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a fitted garment traps a thin layer of insulating air directly against the skin. Suddenly, you aren't just wearing a heavy blanket, you have thermal regulation.
Which means you can survive in much harsher, colder climates.
Precisely. That tiny piece of metal meant humans could migrate further north, endure extreme winters, and build shelters in environments that would have previously been a death sentence.
That completely changes the geographical map of where humans can even exist. And there's a detail in the sources about Idris that I really loved. It notes that while he was cutting and sewing these very first garments, he would constantly praise God.
Which highlights this really seamless integration of deep spiritual mindfulness with, highly advanced practical craftsmanship.
Right. He wasn't just doing mundane manual labor.
Not at all. From the perspective of the text, he was engineering a new mode of human survival and viewing that scientific process as an act of worship.
It's just incredible to reframe the clothes in our closets as a piece of ancient survival technology. And speaking of the things we do every single day to maintain our bodies, the sources highlight Prophet Muhammad's massive contribution to personal hygiene.
Going back 1,400 years.
Yeah, exactly. The texts detail his introduction and heavy promotion of the miswak. This is a natural toothbrush made from the twigs of the Salvador persica tree. But here's where I get a little confused.
Okay, what's the hang-up?
Well, we have modern dentistry now. We have electric toothbrushes and scientifically formulated toothpaste. How is chewing on a tree branch considered an innovation?
Well, the chemical composition of the Salvador persica tree is actually staggering. When modern dental experts analyze this specific wood, they find a sophisticated cocktail of naturally occurring compounds.
So it's not just regular wood.
Not even close. It is loaded with natural abrasives that scrub plaque without destroying enamel, and it contains natural antiseptics that actively kill the bacteria responsible for gum disease.
Wait, really? So it's not just physical scrubbing, it's chemical cleaning.
Let's go even deeper. It contains astringents.
What did that do?
Well, in chemistry, an astringent is a substance that causes the contraction of body tissues. When you use the miswak, those natural astringents interact with the cellular structure of your gums, physically tightening the tissue around the base of the teeth.
Oh, wow. So it keeps them anchored.
Exactly. It prevents the teeth from loosening as a person ages. In the tech world today, we would call this ancient biohacking.
Biohacking. That's wild.
He identified a biological tool that optimized human health in a very hostile desert environment. In fact, many major toothpaste brands today still extract those exact compounds to put into their products.
Okay, I see the chemistry now. But having a good piece of health tech is only half the battle. Think about how hard it is today to get people to just floss.
Oh, a total nightmare.
Right. So how did he get an entire 7th century society to adopt this rigorous dental hygiene routine?
That is where the behavioral engineering comes in. The true genius wasn't just identifying the plant, it was the implementation strategy, what we would call habit stacking today.
Habit stacking. Like attaching a new habit to something you already do.
Exactly that concept, executed on a societal level centuries before modern psychology even existed. By tying the physical use of the miswak to a spiritual practice, he ensured mass adoption.
Ah, he connected it to the prayers.
Right. He heavily encouraged its use right before prayers. And since the prayers happen 5 times a day, he systematically built a dental hygiene routine into the unbreakable daily rhythm of the community.
That's incredibly smart. Tying physical cleanliness to spiritual purity meant this piece of health technology scaled rapidly across entirely different cultures and continents.
He turned an invention into a societal reflex.
Brilliant. Okay, so we have covered the micro level. Personal tools, hygiene, the things we use on our bodies. But as we scale up from our personal daily lives, the sources transition to how these figures innovated to protect and house entire communities. Let's look at Prophet Noah.
A major leap in scale.
Definitely. Obviously, he is globally known for the Ark, but usually the story is just big flood, big wooden box, lots of animals. These sources, however, dive into the actual engineering of the vessel, highlighting specific compartments and advanced ventilation.
Which is crucial, because if you look at this purely as an engineering problem, housing a massive, diverse biological ecosystem in a closed space is a nightmare.
I can only imagine the smell.
Well, worse than the smell. Without an advanced understanding of ventilation, the sheer volume of methane and carbon dioxide produced by the cargo would have been lethal.
Oh, wow. They would have suffocated.
Long before the water ever reached them, the design had to incorporate systems to constantly cycle fresh air through the lower decks.
And the sources also point out the compartmentalization of the Ark. It wasn't just one giant open room.
Right. Think about the fluid dynamics of a colossal wooden vessel on turbulent flood stage waters.
It would be incredibly unstable.
Exactly. If you have a massive open hold, all the weight, the animals, the supplies shifts violently with every wave. The compartments weren't just cages, they were structural necessities for weight distribution.
To keep the whole thing from flipping over.
By compartmentalizing the hull, you lock the center of gravity in place. It shows a highly sophisticated grasp of structural integrity and physics to prevent the vessel from capsizing in extreme kinetic conditions.
But the detail about Noah that made my jaw actually drop was his invention of a water filtration system.
Oh, this part's fascinating.
The sources mentioned he used layers of gravel, sand, and charcoal to purify water for drinking. I read that and immediately thought of the water filter sitting in my fridge right now. Did Noah literally invent the Brita filter?
The modern water filter you have in your kitchen operates on the exact same chemical principles outlined in these ancient texts. The sequence of materials is flawless environmental engineering.
But how does it actually work?
Well, when you pour contaminated water through the system, the top layer of gravel acts as a macrofilter, catching the large physical debris. As the water trickles down into the sand, the tighter spaces trap the finer particulates.
But that just makes the water look clean. It doesn't mean it is safe to drink.
Right, and that's where the charcoal comes in. The charcoal is where the molecular magic happens. Charcoal operates through a chemical process called adsorption. with a D, not a B.
Adsorption. Okay, what's the difference?
Unlike a sponge that absorbs water into itself, charcoal has an incredibly vast, microscopic surface area full of tiny, jagged pores. As the water passes through, the toxins, impurities, and chemical contaminants are magnetically drawn to the surface of the charcoal and get chemically bound to those pores.
That is unbelievable.
To understand and implement that exact sequence, macrofiltration, microfiltration, and then chemical adsorption demonstrates an elite understanding of chemistry.
And here's where it gets really interesting. That theme of utilizing local natural materials for environmental engineering carries directly over into architecture.
Yes, it's a very consistent through line.
The sources detail how Prophet Muhammad designed the Quba Mosque in Medina, the very first mosque built entirely by Muslims. It stands out in the texts as an epitome of what we now call sustainable design or eco-friendly architecture.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how civilizations usually expand, the standard model is to conquer the environment.
Right, clear-cut the forests, quarry the stone.
Exactly. You drag materials hundreds of miles to build a monument to your power. The Quba Mosque represents a total rejection of that philosophy.
The texts note the structure heavily utilized palm tree trunks for support beams and relied entirely on local materials. Why palm trees specifically?
Palm wood is uniquely suited to desert environments. It has a high thermal mass.
Meaning it holds onto heat.
Right. It absorbs the intense desert heat during the day and releases it slowly at night, naturally regulating the temperature inside the building.
So it's ancient air conditioning.
Pretty much. Furthermore, building with local materials means you aren't expending massive amounts of logistical energy to transport heavy stone or timber across vast distances. It minimizes the ecological disruption of the surrounding area.
So long before anyone was tracking a carbon footprint, the blueprint was already laid out to build with the environment rather than over it. It is incredibly relevant for anyone working in supply chains or sustainable development today.
Absolutely.
But, as amazing as sustainable wood and stone are, to truly advance a civilization, to build infrastructure that lasts for millennia, you eventually need stronger materials. You have to master heavy industry.
You need metal.
Exactly. And that leads us to the metallurgy pioneered by Prophet Solomon.
This is where we cross the threshold into advanced material sciences.
Now, I have to admit, I always associated Solomon with vast wealth, gold, maybe a magical ring, or his interactions with the Queen of Sheba, the mystical elements. Are these sources telling me he was actually running a massive metallurgical industrial complex?
The historical and theological texts are very clear on his industrial prowess. While he is certainly famous in the sources for commanding winds and communicating with animals, he also directed men and jinn to aggressively mine the earth and extract minerals.
He was a mining magnate.
He was. He was favored with a massive copper mine, which was an exceptionally rare and valuable metal at the time. Mastering copper, and more importantly, iron, was the ancient equivalent of mastering silicon today.
So if you controlled the metals, you controlled the future of technology.
Exactly right.
The texts call iron the mother of all materials. But there is a very specific engineering detail in the sources that stopped me in my tracks. It says Solomon engaged in advanced metallurgical processes, specifically creating a font of molten brass and pouring that molten brass over solid iron tools and infrastructure.
Yeah.
I just don't understand the logic there. If iron is the strongest metal, why coat it in anything else? Why not just use the iron on its own?
Because iron, for all of its structural superiority, has a fatal elemental flaw. It oxidizes.
Rust.
Exactly. When iron is exposed to moisture in the air or rain, it rusts. It degrades, becomes brittle, and eventually crumbles into dust. Brass, on the other hand, is an alloy made of copper and zinc. It is highly resistant to corrosion, and crucially, it has a much lower melting point than iron.
Oh, wow. So you can melt the brass into a liquid without melting the iron beneath it.
Exactly. By pouring the molten brass over the solid iron, Solomon was executing an ancient form of galvanization.
So the brass acts as a shield.
A weatherproof, rust-proof shell, perfectly molded over the unbreakable strength of the iron core.
He gets the load-bearing strength of the iron, combined with the corrosion resistance of the brass. That is genius.
Now, let's look at the macroeconomic impact of that single innovation.
Okay.
When you can create tools, plows, weapons, and structural supports that do not rust or degrade over time, you give your civilization an unparalleled advantage. A normal kingdom has to constantly dedicate a massive percentage of its labor force and resources just to replace the tools that are rotting away.
But if tools never break.
By eliminating the decay of his own infrastructure, Solomon freed up his civilization's energy to focus entirely on expansion, art, and further innovation.
That reframes him completely. He wasn't just a king sitting on a golden throne. He was an industrial titan driving a technological revolution.
He built the foundation for a permanent society.
But, as you just explained, mastering materials gives a society great power. The inevitable problem every great civilization faces, though, is resource depletion. What happens when the natural resources run out, or the climate shifts?
The boom and bust cycle.
Right. The natural progression from mastering materials is figuring out how to optimize them to prevent total societal collapse. And that brings us to Prophet Yusuf, or Joseph, in Egypt.
What Yusuf implemented in Egypt is arguably one of the most profound examples of macroeconomics, lean management, and crisis mitigation in recorded history.
The sources outline a massive nationwide resource optimization plan. He analyzed a prediction of the future climate and commanded the people of Egypt to sow crops aggressively for 7 years of abundance.
But there was a catch.
Right. The crucial, highly specific instruction was that when they harvested the grain, they had to leave it in its ear, meaning inside the husk, except for the tiny fraction they needed to eat right then. This was a strategic stockpile to survive a guaranteed 7 years of devastating drought and famine that would follow.
A massive undertaking.
So what does this all mean for a listener today? I look at this and see modern supply chain management. But imagine being an ancient Egyptian farmer. You break your back growing this massive surplus of food, and your leader tells you that you aren't allowed to feast. You have to lock it away for 7 years.
It raises a really vital question for modern society. How do we manage abundance?
We usually don't do it very well.
Right. It is a fundamental human instinct to consume whatever is immediately in front of us. When times are good, economies relax, people over-leverage, and societies over-consume. Yusuf's strategy required a masterpiece of psychological discipline.
To get everyone on board.
He had to convince an entire empire to delay gratification for their own long-term survival.
I am curious about the actual science of leaving the grain in the ear, though. If you were trying to maximize storage space in a silo for a nationwide famine, wouldn't it be more efficient to thresh all the grain, get rid of the bulky stalks, and just store the dense kernels in bags?
You'd think so, but if you did that, the entire kingdom would have starved to death by year 3.
Wait, really? Why?
Because when you thresh grain, you strip away its natural armor. You expose the vulnerable kernel to oxygen, ambient moisture, and microscopic pests.
Oh, so it just goes bad faster.
It will rot, ferment, or be consumed by insects long before the 7-year mark. The husk is nature's perfect, vacuum-sealed protective packaging.
So it's a conscious preservation technique.
A highly scientific method of biopreservation. By leaving the grain in the ear, the crop undergoes a natural, slow desiccation process. It stays perfectly dry and biologically dormant.
That is amazing.
Yusuf wasn't just hoarding food. He was applying organic chemistry to ensure the food supply remained viable for nearly a decade. And this scientific approach links directly back to a core overarching theme found in all of these sources. The text referred to the concept of amana,
Amarna, a trust.
a divine trust. The philosophy is that humanity does not actually own the Earth's resources. We don't own the water, the iron, or the grain. We are merely appointed as the managers of it.
So we have a responsibility to it.
Exactly. When you view a resource as a divine trust, wasting it isn't just bad economics or poor supply chain management. It is a profound ethical failure. Yusuf optimized not just the material resource of the grain, but the human capital of Egypt, managing their labor, their psychology, and their consumption flawlessly.
It is just staggering when you pull all of these threads together. Think about the incredible journey we have taken through these texts today.
It really is quite a journey.
We started with Prophet Idris taking that very first needle to a piece of animal skin, fundamentally changing human thermal regulation and rewriting the map of human migration. We saw Prophet Muhammad hacking human behavior with habit stacking to ensure global dental hygiene using the chemical compounds of the miswak, and designing sustainable, climate-adapted architecture with the Tuba Mosque.
And then scaling up to massive engineering.
Right. We decoded the fluid dynamics and the charcoal absorption of Noah's Ark. We stepped into the heavy, industrial, brass galvanized foundries of Prophet Solomon. And finally, we looked at the macroeconomic biopreservation strategies of Prophet Yusuf, who literally saved an entire civilization from starvation.
All hiding in plain sight in these ancient texts.
Being truly well-informed today doesn't just mean keeping up with the latest tech blogs or startup news. It means recognizing that the ancients weren't just sitting around in the dark, helpless, waiting for modern technology to arrive and save them. They were actively, brilliantly engineering the world we live in right now.
They laid the invisible foundation for our modern comforts. And analyzing them through this lens leaves us with a truly provocative thought to mull over.
I love this. Let's hear it.
We have spent centuries reading these historical and religious texts almost exclusively for spiritual, moral, or philosophical guidance. We look to them to tell us how to be good people, how to treat our neighbors. But if these ancient texts contain such precise, scientifically sound blueprints for sustainable architecture, advanced material sciences, and macroeconomics, what else is in there?
That is a great question.
What other technological breakthroughs, environmental solutions, or complex scientific formulas might still be hiding in plain sight? What if the key to our next great leap forward is just masked as a simple ancient parable, quietly waiting for a modern, curious mind to finally decode it?